awesome lineup. Oh, thanks, Gina. An awesome lineup of folks joining us from Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt today, to report on the news at COP27. In US news, if you haven't voted yet, go vote. FYI, just do it. Just do the vote thing. Be a climate voter. You know what that means. And I'm Kristen Poppleton. If I haven't met you before, I'm the Senior Director of Programs at Climate Generation. And this has become a super fun tradition to host a clean call during November that features the voices of the folks that are over in whatever place the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change's Conference of the Parties is happening. And this year we have a whole new crew. Some years I've been able to be there. Some years others of you here on the call have been able to be there. And what my plan today was maybe to bypass some of the introduction stuff. And if you have announcements, put it in the chat, just being conscious of our time with these folks. And if we have time at the end, maybe folks can come back and do some announcements. The people that are joining us, some of them have never been on a clean call before. And I kind of explained that this is a call that happens every Tuesday at noon for me in Central Time since the beginning of my profession in climate change education, I think. So it's a fun, very welcoming, important, and informal group here. So there's no pressure. People who are on the call right now have contributed some photos. And so I'm going to be sharing my screen to show them. I'm going to open up with just a little background and let them just talk. And we may have a couple other folks coming in too. I know they were attending things, so we'll see if they're able to do that, to join. And so that said, I'm gonna share my screen and it'll talk for a couple minutes and then turn it over to the people that are actually interesting here with you all today, our guests. So here we go. Thumbs up if you see that. Thumbs up. All right, so live from COP27. We always like to start things off with a land acknowledgement, especially when we are in a space where we are thinking about the voices and rights of marginalized communities around the world. And the United Nations has a statement on the rights of Indigenous peoples, which should be centered in the decisions that they make. And is definitely something that is leading at COP this year as they discuss the loss and damage, which probably some of our guests will talk about today. We also, especially once again, also I think with this being an Africa COP, as they call it, because it is in Egypt, acknowledging that this country has actually been built on the backs of humans that were brought, not just brought, forced to come to this country from Africa, and acknowledging that labor that went into that, and also going back to loss and damage. What does reparations mean? What does it mean to acknowledge these past wrongs and pay it forward? Our organization, we ignite, sustain the ability of educators, youth, and communities to act on systems perpetuating the climate crisis. And this COP program, we've been sending delegations to COP since 2009. The folks that are joining us today, some are with Climate Generation, some are not. And for those of you that have no idea, you just came because you're like, what is COP and why are we talking about it? COP is a conference that's happened 27 years in a row to try and solve the issue of climate change at an international level between 197, 198-ish different countries or parties. Obviously, we haven't figured it out yet, but they have been working towards it. I will say that one thing that I always, I don't know if it's comforting, but like to think about is the decisions that are made at this level have to be made by consensus. And so if you think about it, anything that comes out of these meetings between 197 countries is pretty phenomenal. We know that the major and important decisions and work that's being done is being done locally and regionally, sometimes nationally. And so these meetings are an opportunity to come and kind of, highlight the really important things around the world. But when we don't come away with like amazing progress, that doesn't mean we haven't been able to make progress in other places. Our organization and all of you all here in Clean that are doing education work is really focused on this idea of action for climate empowerment. And this is it's called ACE short, and it comes out of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And it's the part of the work that recognizes that in order to actually accomplish any of this stuff, we need to have education and training and public participation, public awareness raising, network coordination, the stuff that we all do. This is the stuff that actually we need to accelerate that action and give it the push it needs to happen. And we were really excited this year to work with an artist who we met actually at COP last year, who is helping us articulate some of the work that's happening at COP, some of the work of ACE through her visual illustrations. And so this is something that she did for us in the build up to COP, bringing together all the pieces of what does it mean to do ACE, be ACE. And I will say that one of the reasons that we send people to these climate negotiations is it's really important to send the voices of youth, send the voices of our communities of color, our island nations, the folks who need to be centered in this, to these places and have their voices heard. It's also important for their voices to be heard, and that's them actually utilizing ACE. That's them actually implementing. What is ACE? It's actually participating, using your voice, educating others. And then it's important for us to be thinking about how can we hold ourselves accountable to doing this work. And we have friends in the policy realm that are doing a lot of work in that respect too. That's actually asking that countries have to report out on their ACE work alongside with their greenhouse gas emission reduction, which I think is super exciting and sort of a progress towards that. So we have a delegation of 12 folks that are at COP, 6 this week and 6 next week. Some of them are here with us, like I said. Some of them are our partners and friends that are also at COP. And they are at the center of a couple of really key issues that I'm not going to talk about. I'm just going to highlight that human rights, loss and damage, and this centering of critical voices I mentioned is really, I think, a big theme. We can talk about it more towards the end, and I'm sure you'll hear it as a theme and some of the things they're talking about too. And to start us off with just this arriving, we're in the first week of COP. This is from our graphic illustrator that we're working with, her perception as she came into the COP, her view. And we're going to kick it off with 2 guests that we have with us from Illinois that we had the pleasure of hooking up with and working with, Greta Kringle and Fatima Perez, who are going to tell us more about It's Our Future and the organization that they work with and their high school. And then I have pictures and I can just go through them if you guys want to talk through them. So with that, introduce yourselves.
Hi, everybody. I am Greta Kringle. I'm a science teacher, environmental science, chemistry, and biology at Solorio Academy in Chicago, and also, I guess, a chaperone on the It's Our Future youth climate activist trip. And I'll let Fatima.
Yeah. Well, I'm Fatima. I am a senior at Solorio Academy High School, and I'm here with It's Our Future, just exploring COP27. It's my first year ever. So yeah, that's who I am.
Yeah, same here. So I think Fatima's story is probably more interesting than mine, because, the reason that we're here is really to get youth to explore their interests here at COP and just learn a ton, which I'm also learning a ton, but I feel like I'm going to let Fatima start and then I will kind of fill in where I can.
Yeah, okay, so
And I'm throwing you under the bus.
that's fine. No, so you mentioned just to talk about our high school and It's Our Future and zero waste, because zero waste is part of our high school. So in terms of my journey and climate activism, I think without me being aware of it, it started since I was young when I lived in Mexico, because you live a different life there. And I'd say we were pretty sustainable in terms of we grew our own organic produce, and we were composting, and you're using that food waste for other stuff, and I was doing that already. I just didn't know it had that label. And now that I think about it, I also think of the community that I lived in, and just all the effects that come from climate change, because there are a lot of flooding and overflowing from bodies of water. There's a river near where my grandma used to live. Well, she still lives there, but I don't know. I haven't been there in a long time. And also scarcity of water, because they just recently had to dug up another well trying to get water, dug up multiple wells trying to get water, until they finally got it. But that's just a struggle that my community where I lived in has also been struggling with. And now transitioning to high school, obviously throughout middle school, I always knew this was an issue. But I think my focus started probably, obviously I got introduced into zero waste as a freshman, because has been implemented for a long time now. And then I think I started becoming more interested in sophomore year, but sophomore year was online. It was a weird time. So now last year was when I joined zero waste and really started getting projects going with my other peers, and really just trying to mobilize some policy with CPS, and trying to go plastic free in our cafeteria, but also sort of letting that trickle down to other schools. And then this opportunity came across of hey, you can go to Egypt. And that's how we got connected with Our Future. Well, technically through 7 Generations, which manages zero waste. And it was just a journey of explaining to Rachel where I come from and why I'd be interested in coming in the first place. And I luckily convinced Rachel, which I'm super happy about. Thank you, Rachel, for giving me this amazing opportunity. And now I'm here, and that's how I'm connected to It's Our Future now. And we've been meeting the entire summer and up until now, just preparing for this event. And I really hope to remain connected out throughout later in college, because I think it's important to sort of have long-term connections once you join a group, right? And in terms of my school, I already mentioned, there's other really cool students who are involved, my best friend just doing amazing things in our group as well. And now that I'm a cop, yeah.
Do you want to talk about your focus area?
Oh yeah, I'll talk about my focus area. In terms of my focus area, I'm focusing on the impact of climate change and the demographic of low-income people, obviously coming from a low-income background, but also thinking about sort of my ancestry from living in because I lived in Mexico, but obviously I'm Mexican, so I do have in a way ancestry for being an indigenous person, right? In a way, I don't know much about it, but that's why I also want to connect more, because I know that the town where my grandma settled was originally had a population of indigenous people, but they've sort of kind of moved away, and the language was lost, and the culture and story about it was lost, which is really sad for me because I wish I would have known more about it. So now I'm trying to kind of connect back to those roots by learning about indigenous groups and how they're being impacted and what solutions they're trying to put at the forefront of the climate change fight, right? So here, this picture, I'm here with, she is a citizen from Tuvalu, and she just shared her story on why she's here at COP, and her very grounded stance in fighting for her country and refusing to become yet again a refugee, because that's not a solution. That's just a consequence of climate change, right? So her story I talked about in my blog, because I really thought it was super insightful just from the get-go, because I wasn't even at the conference at this point yet. So it was really great to talk to her, kind of to get things going and to have a more specific perspective once I actually made it to the conference, when I talked to other groups, which actually, yeah, that came back later. But here I am with a solar cooker, which was a super fun thing to learn about. I knew it was probably possible. I'd never seen a solar cooker, so it was just nice seeing one. And here I have a picture of the pavilion, the Africa pavilion, which had a very interesting panel yesterday, as there was the president of Zimbabwe and other African countries, and just them discussing that African countries are truly ready with the workforce and the efforts and the solutions to move forward in the fight with climate change. Is just about being properly financed by developed countries. And by finance, that doesn't mean developed countries coming to these underdeveloped countries and offering and proposing solutions, because they already do have these solutions available. So that's the story behind these pictures. And you could probably talk about these because I wasn't there.
Yeah, so thank you, Fatima. So we have some other students here. Obviously, we're traveling with a group of 5. And Antonio is our other student. And I've been with him most because we've been in the innovation zone and the green zone, kind of on the outside. And he is exploring energy solutions. And I'm a science teacher, so I've really loved being able to kind of go around and film his interviews with him, because it's just been really cool to see the innovation with energy that's happening. And then also we've been able to, we saw a lot of like the corporate side of it this morning, which was cool because the solutions are probably, you know, where we have to rely on the private sector for many of these things. And then we spent the afternoon conducting interviews in the academic tent in the green zone, which was also amazing because this was actually where there were people from Egypt, scientists from Egypt, walking Antonio and myself and Rachel through some pretty complicated science solutions that they were working on and implementing in the university setting, and then also you know, applying it in their city, mostly Cairo. So that was just like an awesome opportunity for me to like connect what I love, science, also get to see a student conducting these interviews and learning a lot with his interest in energy, but also, you know, like Antonio started the day not knowing about hydrogen fuel, and ended up knowing, you know, a lot of the science and a lot of the issues and the obstacles to making that happen. So just, you know, I think most of you out there are educators, and we all love that like moment where you see your students, like things click and the amazement happens. And I've just had the opportunity to see that so many times, and see it in this wide range of applications, from, you know, Microsoft trying to tell us how they're going to solve all the problems of the world, than to like students that could be, you know, these kids in a few years developing their solutions in academia.
And then these pictures, this was in front of the youth pavilion, the children and youth pavilion yesterday. But really, I think the session started today. And I think I actually saw 2 people from Climate Gen in there today. I'm not sure if I'm mistaken, but I saw someone drawing like right in front of me. They were drawing the pavilion. And I thought it was super cool. I was like, oh, that's super cool. And who would have thought? Yeah. And I'm pretty sure I think your name is Pooja. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right. You were there just kind of like getting things going, doing icebreakers, which is so funny because you were like, turn to the right and talk to the person that's next to you. And I'm like, I already know the person's there, but I talked to the person from the left. And yeah, it was cool to meet new people. And then here, this guy was just explaining the science behind the solar cookers.
Awesome. I think those are the pictures I pulled out. Do you guys, can you stick on for a little bit still?
Yeah,
Awesome,
for
because
sure.
I have Eric is here and I know he has to head out sooner than later, so I was going to have him talk briefly through his picks before we move on to the next. And so Eric, while I scroll ahead to yours, go ahead and introduce yourself. Eric Passy is from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and one of Climate Gen's delegates.
Hey, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay, cool. Hey, everyone. My name is Eric Passy. I am, as Kristen mentioned, from Minnesota, Minneapolis. I am with a company called New Energy Equity. I've been in the clean energy space for over 10 years. And so I'm kind of the wise millennial of the group. But super passionate about the climate issue. My father was an immigrant from a place called Tonga, which is a low-lying nation in the South Pacific. And I was fortunate enough to visit there a handful of years ago and meet all sorts of wonderful people, including relatives for the first time, and an uncle, cousins, first cousins. And it really reminded me that there's so much at stake with the climate issue. My father unfortunately passed away just a couple of years after that, but I have been reconnecting with the Polynesian side of my family, and especially here at COP. There are a lot of Polynesians, a lot of small island nations, and it's been super inspiring. This is my first COP, and there are people, as you can imagine, from all over the world, 190 plus countries. And some of the striking things that I've taken away is that there are people working on every facet of the climate issue across the globe, and in so many different levels, and very high levels. And so in my professional life in clean energy and solar, and specifically, I had a kick out of several sessions today, including one about green hydrogen and renewable energy in Africa. And there was 2 ministers of energy from Nambia as well as Morocco, talking about how Africa can kind of be an exporter of energy and be a leader in green hydrogen. And I thought that was super interesting. You know, it's only really day 3, but kind of day 2 technically, in the first week. So I have a few photos here. The first day that I visited on Sunday, there were 2 leaders from the Singapore Pavilion that were putting on a youth hackathon, where we were split into groups to develop to address a problem that we all saw as being a real issue, and come up with a solution and propose that all within the span of about an hour and a half. And it was so the picture in the middle, in the upper middle there, is me, Janara, and Liang. Janara's a World Health professional from Egypt, and Liang is a photojournalist and leader from Singapore, from Hong Kong, sorry. And what we came up with, which is coincidentally the same topic as other folks that were doing the hackathon, and we had a few other people from Peru on our team as well, was education related to the climate issue. And what had prompted that, at least for me, was reading an article from November 1st in the New York Times stating that middle school students only receive on average 2 hours of climate education per year. And it is that's woefully inadequate to the issue that's at hand. And we, talked about how that leads to climate illiteracy and then inaction. And what we developed as a group was talking about, and this is interesting because it's the same thing that Climate Generation is working on, is that climate is really interdisciplinary in that it touches everything from economics to political science, social science, foreign studies, career training. And so if we were to even just treat climate similarly in those areas of study, we would all of a sudden quintuple or more the amount of time that students are spending on climate, and they would learn the interwovenness of how this issue touches basically every part of the human experience, or can. And so that was really fun, day one, and just meeting so many passionate young people kind of just re-inspired me. The picture at the bottom is the launch of the US Center, which was today, and I had the good fortune of carving out, although not the best viewing area, but I was able to see John Kerry, who's the climate czar, essentially, of the US, speak, Michael Bloomberg, John Podesta, all talk today at this kind of small venue. And as John Kerry was kind of walking away, I was kind of following him for a minute, and you'd hear journalists talk about loss and damage, and that's a huge topic right now at COP, which is all the affected nations, specifically poor nations that are bearing the brunt of climate devastation, are seeking, and not even necessarily seeking, but deserve compensation and payment for loss and damage. And it's kind of a trending hashtag, and something that you'll probably hear quite a bit about coming out of COP. And so that was a really interesting moment. And of course, John Kerry scurried away before he answered those kind of pointed questions. But it's again an issue that we'll continue to hear a lot about. On the upper right-hand corner is just kind of a walking through the facilities in the blue zone. There are just countless numbers of murals, pavilions, which are essentially just huge trade show booths that accommodate for all of these talking sessions, public talking sessions, and gathering places, and one of which is close to my heart, in the bottom right-hand corner, is the picture of me in the Pacific Island, or as they call it, the Moana Blue Pavilion. And there I met a ton of other Polynesian people. And it was really heartening because I feel like in Minnesota, I'm a little bit on an island, so to speak, even though I'm in the middle of I'm very landlocked in Minnesota. But in terms of connecting with the Polynesian side of myself, there's just, not a lot of people like me that are doing the same thing that I'm doing. And here at COP, it's everyone is contributing at such a high level. This morning, there was a declaration, and they called it the Kiowa Declaration, which was a summation of all the small island nations coming together to propose essentially declare a climate emergency on their own terms and in their own voices. And it culminated with a really cool performance that was led by the Tuvalu delegation. And it was a traditional dance, but it was also kind of incorporating all these other really cool music and dance. And it was I was fortunate enough to capture it video, but that obviously didn't make it here. It's a big file. And so that's just kind of the first 3 days. And I'm here with the Climate Action Network this evening at this really cool venue I'll kind of show you guys. And they're working on a lot of different things related to COP. This year's a little different than other years in that obviously there's a hesitation to really do many public protests because of the government here, and that's obviously understandable. But they're taking very careful efforts to address opportunities within the Blue Zone, which is the UN essentially, and outside of Egyptian jurisdiction. And then earlier this evening, I met with other Minnesota people, and then later this evening, there's another networking opportunity. So just a lot of different things happening, and it's nonstop. And got to drink a lot of water, get good sleep. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun, and it's only been 3 days. And so I do want to thank again Climate Generation for their support in helping us get out here, because I do think it really does matter, and especially on the youth side. Again, being a wise millennial, I have a slightly different perspective, but the youth do have a lot of cachet at this point, and rightfully so. No other kind of demographic has been more outspoken on climate recently, and they've made significant changes in the U.S. specifically. Looking no further than the Sunrise Movement, obviously Greta Thunberg and Fridays for Future. It's a massive movement that's being led by the youth, and it's been inspiring to see and hear their perspectives. So again, thanks Climate Generation, and hopefully I gave a little bit of insight into what's happening out here.
With some great background music too, Eric.
Thank you. I know it's interesting. Sure.
I feel like I'm there. Thank you so much for joining us. I know you might have to check out, but thanks for your reflections. Carolyn, I've got you all lined up here next if you want to go. I'm gonna scroll to your pictures.
Sure.
There we go.
Cool. Hi, everyone. I'm Caroline, and I'm delighted to be here. I'm here on behalf of the Wild Center and the Youth Climate Program there. Unfortunately, Jen had to hop off because they have their annual Adirondack Youth Climate Summit that starts tomorrow. But I think Gina's still here, and we have been doing that together since we were little middle schoolers. But anyway, and I'm also here on behalf of Clarkson University, which is where I'm doing my master's degree, and I'm working on stuff with the U.S. Green Building Council and their Lead for Communities program. So I'm kind of in part looking at a lot of ACE and education and youth related events, and in part looking at a lot of buildings and sustainable planning and like urban planning systems. Yeah. Oh, so one of the first things that happened was I accidentally stumbled upon the Cornell booth, and I went to Cornell, and I actually did the same class that the students here did, and was able to go to COP in Poland, COP 24. And I sort of spent the day kind of helping them navigate the first day of COP, which is always really overwhelming. And it was overwhelming for me too, because it's like chaotic and hard to find everything, but it was really fun to kind of be on the other side of that and see who the new students are, and some of their work is similar to work I did. So for that COP, I was working on a paper on loss and damages for the Kingdom of Tonga, which at the time, loss and damages was much less salient than it is now. And so it's really refreshing that it's being included in negotiations and really prioritized. And it's like a real buzzword at the COP this year, which is new to me, at least. I don't know how it was last year, but it's really nice to hear that. I don't know what other pictures I included. Oh, cool. Speaking of Tonga, this is
Willie Louise.
yeah, yes. And he is a Tongan, I guess he's an artist. I didn't meet him when I originally did my project for Tonga, but he is associated with a lot of the same people that I worked with, and I had a great conversation with him where we again discussed how loss and damages is being discussed at this COP, and it was also just a good example of how climate work is really, I mean, obviously this conference is huge and there's so many people doing amazing work around the world who do not have the privilege to be here, but it's also wonderful that these connections last, and like it's a good lesson in, I guess, just keeping up with people and making sure that you make a lasting impression so that you can, you know, be remembered and also like continue to do work across geographic boundaries, I guess. This was just a picture of John Kerry at the Innovation Zone this morning. And he was talking about the role of the private sector in mitigation and adaptation, I guess. And he also spoke at the opening of the U.S. Center, which I was not at. So I'm not sure what his other policy priorities are this year, but I've seen him 3 times, which is really random. This was one of my favorite sessions I attended today. It was at the Climate Justice Pavilion. So this year is the first ever Climate Justice Pavilion, which has some, it's a bunch of different organizations have worked to put it on. Haley Krim, who I know a lot of you probably know, is helping with that. And this was their opening event that had 3 of the most important voices in environmental justice in the US. So Peggy Shepard from We Act for Environmental Justice, and Beverly Wright, Dr. Beverly Wright, and Dr. Robert Bullard, who has written pretty much the foundational literature on environmental justice. If you haven't read him, do, because he's incredible, and they were just really amazing and inspiring, and I just felt in awe to be in their presence. And they'll be here all week doing a bunch of different panels, so if 2 people who are here, if you miss this, like, go to things that have any of these 3 people, because they, like, Robert Bullard essentially invented and, like, in an academic sense, the concept of environmental justice. And so he's like very, very important, and it's a real honor and privilege to be able to hear from him. So that was amazing. I don't remember what else I put, if there was anything else.
Those are the 3 I got from you.
Okay, so I have a couple of other notes, which I would say are my general reflections so far. So first of all, I went to the Conference of Youth last week, which is meant to be a policy preparatory conference for young people. And so youth as defined, by the UN, so 18 to 30 or whatever. And I would say most of the people there, I would say are in their 20s, like mid-20s, early 20s. And it was 700 youth from 141 nations. And I would say I met maybe 4 other people from the US, which is amazing, because I feel like in these spaces, the United States and like Europe are always like really overrepresented. And at the COI, they call it, the Conference of Youth, that was not the case, which is awesome. And so I had 2 roommates, one from Bahrain and one from Greece, and learned a whole lot from them and everyone else I met there. And I also learned kind of more about the structure of country delegations. And so a lot of the people who are at the COI are party delegates, members of their own country's delegation. And in the US, like we have a pretty antiquated and like kind of bureaucratic system of choosing our delegation. So it's always government and like negotiators for the government and not like civil society, young people, but or even like members of the private sector really. And other nations have like all of these different interests, especially a youth delegation or youth negotiators represented in their delegation. So I think that that's somewhere that the US is like has a really strong presence here in terms of civil society, but it's really unfortunate that we're not underrepresented. We're just not represented at all in our own delegation. What else? Yeah, I already mentioned that I am really pleased to see loss and damage being discussed everywhere, and I'm following those negotiations pretty closely because of my previous work with the Kingdom of Tonga. And I hope that some sort of provision comes out of that, and we'll see where that goes. And another really salient topic that I've noticed is nature, both in terms of nature-based solutions, but also in terms of nature loss, and how nature loss not only is important ecologically, but also like financially, and poses like trillion-dollar risks to a lot of countries like GDP in terms of you know, natural resources and the equilibrium that we have from nature, and all of these things are being discussed in like all of the different kinds of sessions I'm going to, whether they're about like corporate like ESG or buildings or whatever. So that is awesome to hear, and I've also heard a lot of intersections between this COP and the biodiversity COP, which will be happening in December. And then the last thing is in terms of my work with cities and buildings, I went to a session that Greta also attended, and a couple of our other delegates, and it was about the role of cities in the future of the climate, and one of the things that really stuck with me was cities kind of as a laboratory for change, and using like city and regional based governance to level up and inspire similar policies at the state level, at the federal level, or depending on, you know, what kind of government you have. And yeah, so I think regional work, like if we're doing regional work, sometimes can feel really alienated from the international climate policy space, but regional work is really important and can serve as like leveraging up into the higher levels of government. So yeah, those are my reflections so far.
Awesome. Thanks, Caroline.
Yeah, thank you for
I
having me.
kind of like I just recruited Caroline online. I was like, I think you should come and speak for us. So thanks for jumping in.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we have one more. Patty. Yep, Patty's here. And I don't know if anyone else joined too, but Patty Bourne, I'd love to introduce too. We are working together on Hamline University and Climate Gen have launched a climate literacy certificate, which we're really excited about. And one of the things I'm doing right now is teaching a undergrad and grad course, climate policy and solutions through COP, during COP, which is fun through Hamline. And Patty is over in Egypt too, and has no pics, but she has words, and she has no luggage either. So
right. Sorry, I have no pics. I took some on my phone and I was hoping to be able to shoot them your way, but I didn't get back here in time. But yeah, I'm for me, this is day one, and it's my second COP, and it's slightly overwhelming for me just because it's been sort of a chaotic arrival. So I was only in the blue zone for a short time today. I poked my head into a couple of things, but was sort of just trying to get my bearings. But something that I've been really struck by is, again, I know a lot of folks have mentioned this already, but just the number of young people is really exciting to me and really inspiring and humbling. So I just wanted to mention that. And then something that I've been thinking about a lot since I got on the ground was a conversation I had on the plane ride over here, the flight from New York to Zurich. And I was having a conversation with someone who's here with the US delegation and works, in a lot of the negotiation rooms and kind of high level stuff. And I'm just I'd like to call myself a wise Gen Xer, but I don't know if I've reached the wise part. But so one thing that really struck me about that conversation was that the person that I was talking to said, I keep hearing this thing called climate anxiety. I keep hearing people talk about how the youth are really struggling with climate anxiety. Is that really a thing? And I said, yeah, it's absolutely a thing. I hear about it all the time in my work with undergrads and graduate students and even younger folks. I have 2 teenagers of my own who are certainly have climate anxiety. And so I've been thinking about where that fits into this bigger conversation. How are we addressing that as part of our job as educators? What does that look like and feel like and sound like in different places? And I'm not, I don't have any answers to that, but it's something that I think is a really important part of the conversation we are having about climate literacy and education. But also kind of alongside that climate literacy or that climate anxiety that folks are feeling is the need for us to make spaces for joy and those feelings of hope and optimism that I think can quickly get sort of swept away in the chaos and the worry and the anxiety and everything. And just thinking about how are we as educators showing up and helping make room in young people's lives and our own lives and the lives of others for that hope and optimism again. I think that's so critically important right now. So that's what I'm going to be thinking a lot about as I attend a bunch of different education settings. I have several little notes scattered everywhere right now of different sessions that I'm planning on attending in the next couple of days. And I'm really hoping that I can get the timings to align so that I can do all the things I want to do. But I know from experience, that's kind of a tall order. So I'll just do the best I can. But thanks for hosting this. It's really great to be a part of this.
Awesome. Thanks, Patty.
Yeah.
Is there any questions that people have? I think this is the last person we had that was able to join us. I can put it in the
Can I
chat
just jump in briefly,
opportunity.
Kristen?
Oh, go ahead. Who's
Yeah.
Go.
It's
Yeah,
Rachel.
go ahead,
I'm
Rachel.
Dorothy.
Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to echo Patty's comments about the emotional component and it's our future youth. Will tell you that I'm always bringing up that let's, in this world that's so about science and policy and data, it's so critical to make space for feelings and connection and for sure the fun and joy. So I appreciate you mentioning that. I also wanted to just say it's our future is Chicago-based program. We brought 5 high school students and they have been doing an amazing job of interviewing other leaders, delegates, other youth, and that's posted on our social media and a dispatch similar to the climate generation. We're doing that next live stream. And then when they go back, they will kind of use their clout of having been here to then go speak at their school boards and city council meetings, et cetera, to try and really affect change in their community. So that's exciting. And back to Greta's slide, it was a ways back there, but that was Antonio interviewing John Podesta, and students got to see John Kerry as well speaking today, which is amazing. And I think those are my big things. And we did go snorkeling. Those of us who couldn't get into Blue the other day, it was phenomenal. So okay.
Awesome. Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, and I wanted to point out, so all the students that It's Our Future has brought will be doing a webcast on, I think it's actually at 11 our time. I'll have to check that out. Is it at 11? Or
I've been telling people 12. So,
okay,
yeah.
I think it's at 12. It's 11 next week. So on Thursday this week, and we can put the link in the chat, but I'm really excited to hear from all the students. And if you want to do some following, I see Ingrid has her hand up. Go for it, Ingrid. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Yeah, I had a question. I have a colleague who went to COP26 last year, and she said that a message she heard over and over again from talking with people from developing countries was they felt they lacked capacity to take action, so that even if they had funding, they didn't have the capacity, meaning like they didn't have people who were trained in various fields to be able to implement solutions. But I think I heard maybe it was one of the original speakers here, but you're hearing the opposite message, that people felt they had the capacity to act, they just needed the funding. So it could be just maybe you were, talking to different people, so hearing different messages, or I'm wondering if there's been kind of a shift in the message, if people feel they have the capacity to act now, they just need financial help. I'm curious about that.
I could maybe speak to that, kind of having been part of a delegation at COP24 that was like meant to be a capacity building initiative. And I know that like those kinds of initiatives continue where universities or what have you, research institutions partner with delegations that are smaller in order to increase their capacity. But also, I don't know if it's necessarily a shift in need as much as it's a shift in acknowledgement that the huge component of capacity building is not always human capacity as much as it's funding. And I think like funding is a measure of capacity building that is often kind of overlooked. We're like, oh, if we just like, help them do research, then it'll be okay. But I think people need funding, and a lot of them have, as Fatima mentioned, like have the solutions and just don't have the ability to implement them.
Deborah, did you have a question?
Thank you so much for letting me participate. I would love to get the perspective, and I believe Greta and Fatima might be the best insight into this. Fatima, you probably know from your teacher from ecology, there's many different inputs, and it's not always top-down predator consumer giving a large source to someone else. And I was so interested in your background in both Mexico and indigenous knowledge. And you're in Egypt, where before Microsoft and before the World Bank, there were a lot of solutions and a lot of from the ground up accessible solutions. Are you finding local doable overlap, crossover, compare and contrast, maybe from Mexico to Egypt, of what people have always done for thousands of years in countries that are hot and don't have so much water? And are you finding solutions and respect for things that have worked before on their own?
Yeah, I'd say in terms of like, I went to one of the booths where there's an organization from the United States called the Climate Justice Alliance, which connects a lot of indigenous organizations across the United States. Specifically, also, they're connected to an organization of indigenous people in Little Village, which is in Chicago, where I live. And I mean, some of those solutions are just like having food security and being able to like, grow your own food that's organic, and like just sort of that, which I also like saw in Mexico, maybe not through indigenous people anymore because they've been displaced. But like there's a lot of like everyday things that happen that are helpful. But also just in terms of like there's an urgency from indigenous people to not, well, it's obviously to a certain extent great to involve the private sector because ultimately they have to provide the funding for some of these solutions. But I think what instills fear in indigenous people, and what sometimes makes them so against the help from the private sector, is that the private sector becomes involved, and they become involved in the creation of the solutions, which often can just become more damaging, and just become basically another way to bolster capitalism, right? Which is just terrible because then they're not actually solving anything. It's just for the mere purpose of profit. So I think that's what I have to say. There was a common theme that I saw across Indigenous people's mentality of like, we don't necessarily want the private sector to be at the forefront of this. They are helpful, but in a sense, they have to be listening to Indigenous voices. That's the way that they should help. Yeah.
Frank, did you have a question or did he disappear? Oh, there you are.
No, I
There
just
you
was,
are. I was like,
sensitive
where'd
to
you go?
time. No, he's still here. So my question is just as you go through the time there, one of the things in the United States we're looking at is this idea of capacity. We're starting to see that when you scale up the solutions, there just aren't enough people who have the skills to meet the urgency and scale of deployment. And I'm hearing this implementation or deployment or kind of the shift from negotiation to implementation. But when we get to implementation, there's just not enough people who have the skills to do the work. And I'm just curious as to, are you seeing that? And I can be really, like, I'm talking like specific stuff like electricians, just straight up electricians, HVAC technicians. I mean, there's my HVAC system right there. It's a technical system, you know, the solar installer put that up there. I'm sorry, I'm in my house. So, I mean, but that technical mechanical stuff is a critical piece of a good chunk of this work. But is that conversation showing up? Because that kind of capacity building is very different than, you know, negotiation capacity building or other things like that. So I'm just curious if that's because it's practical stuff.
I love that question. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I also love that question, and I realize it actually does. So today being mostly in the innovation zone, hearing about all these kind of grand private sector plans for all these alternative energy solutions. No one brought up like apprenticeships, training programs. So that was definitely.
Uh-oh, it looks like those guys froze. The internet here is a little wacky. And I can't totally pick up where Greta left off. Do you want to go?
I mean, I think that probably what she was getting at is that, yeah, I mean, I haven't heard, I've been to a lot of sessions, I kind of for this first day on a variety of topics, like with varying degrees of relevance to my actual field, just because it's like fun to explore these things. And in any of these types of discussions, I have not heard any discussion of like, how do we train people to implement these solutions? And like, if we're going to technology our way out of this, like who's going to do that? And how many people are going to do that? And where do we get them? And what field do they currently work in? And do we transfer from fossil fuels? Like it's just, I think it's a just transition topic specifically. So I'll try to hone in on that and maybe have a better answer, hopefully, by the end of the week.
And I think Patty, what Patty just said is actually a critical piece, right? Who teaches them? Like these things don't happen by themselves. So Patty, I heard you.
Yeah, and I hang out in a lot of higher ed spaces, and that conversation rarely comes up. The trade and apprenticeship, the green jobs track is not it's not talked about nearly enough. And I mean, every job is a green job, right? Teaching is a green job. They're all green jobs, but I think specifically what you're talking about is something that doesn't get due time, in at least not in the higher ed conversations that I'm spending time in. But I will try to start talking about it more because I think it's a really important question.
I'm mindful of the time, but I noticed that Manolo is on the call. He's also here, and he's got one student who showed up because he's got a real passion for climate education, and he's actually even doing a podcast on the
Oh,
subject.
cool.
I just, yeah. Do you want to just say hi, Manolo? And he's going to be on the live stream on Thursday. Yeah.
Awesome. Hey, Manolo, we are excited to hear from you on Thursday, right? You'll be there Thursday?
Yep.
Yes, I will. I'm excited too.
Awesome. We're excited to hear from you on Thursday because that's my favorite topic too. Conscious of it being 1:04 and we try to end at 1. And it's bedtime for our Egyptian friends. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining today. And I look forward to following you all and seeing you again on Thursday and seeing those blogs. And if anyone else has any other questions, please follow up with us as well. So thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye. Thank
Or
you.
sleep. Bye.
Vote, 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 vote. Don't forget to vote.
Oh yeah, don't forget to vote.